In the opening scene, we meet Sabina Spielrein, a woman experiencing mental instability. She easily becomes angry and frustrated over small things. Consequently, she is admitted to Berghalsli, a renowned psychiatric hospital in Zurich, Switzerland, in 1904. Sabina is diagnosed with a typical case of hysteria and starts her treatment with Dr. Carl Jung, a Swiss doctor. During their first meeting, Dr. Carl positions himself behind Sabina and notices her struggle to answer questions, marked by her frequent stammering. The next day, Carl takes a walk with Sabina in the woods and discovers an extraordinary ability she possesses, the ability to predict people's words before they say them. When questioned about it, Sabina claims she has an inner angel who communicates with her in German, aiding her in foreseeing things. Upon hearing this, Dr. Carl suggests that her talent could be valuable in pursuing a career in medicine, which aligns with her aspirations. As they continue talking, Sabina carelessly drops her coat on the ground, prompting Dr. Carl to pick it up and dust it off using his walking stick. Surprisingly, this upsets Sabina, and she responds rudely. Several days later, Carl learns that Sabina is actually a well-educated woman with a medical degree. Recognizing her intelligence and vitality, he offers her the opportunity to assist in his experiments, an offer she accepts without hesitation. The scene then shifts to Carl's wife, Emma, who has recently given birth to a beautiful baby girl. Excited about the birth, Carl visits the delivery ward to see his newborn. However, he notices Emma's unhappiness because she had hoped to deliver a male child, as she had promised. In response, Carl consoles Emma, urging her not to entertain such irrational thoughts. Amidst these events, Carl and Sabina continue their talking sessions, during which he uncovers the root cause of her condition. He explains that Sabina's problems began when her abusive father humiliated her, subjecting her to punishment and forcing her to kiss his hands. This actually aroused Sabina, and she began to seek out any form of humiliation. Even the act of Carl striking her coat with his walking stick earlier had provoked excitement in her. With this significant revelation, Dr. Carl arranges a meeting with Dr. Sigmund Freud, a renowned Austrian physician, to discuss their patients and determine the most effective path toward their recovery. As the doctors engage in their conversation, they begin to share their views and analyze each other, leading to a lengthy discussion that stretches on for 13 uninterrupted hours. Despite this, the pair remains unflagging and decides to meet each other very soon. Later, Carl meets Sabina and tells her about his conversation with Dr. Freud. As their conversation unfolds, the two discover their shared interests and grow closer to each other. One day, Dr. Freud has to leave for an urgent business trip, so he writes a letter to Carl, asking him to look after a patient named Dr. Otto Gross, an unstable psychoanalyst known for his brilliance and womanizing tendencies. In the letter, Dr. Freud provides all the details about Otto, including the peculiar fact that he resorts to biting when he becomes angry. For the sake of their friendship, Carl obliges without any hesitation. He then attends a session with Otto, hoping to use his therapeutic talking method to help the patient. During this, Otto reveals his lustful nature, boasting about his numerous mistresses and the children he has fathered with them. He also advises Carl to have extramarital affairs, claiming that having multiple partners keeps a person fit and healthy, while having only one causes a headache. The next day, Sabina actively helps Carl with his research and even cracks a few jokes to keep his spirits up. She's actually starting to recover from her mental condition. Meanwhile, Carl's thoughts drift back to Otto's words. He finds himself gazing at Sabina for a while but manages to control his impulses. That evening, Carl has another therapy session with Otto. Otto asks if he's ever had intimate relationships with his patients. Carl denies it and poses the same question to Otto. Otto reveals that he manipulates his patients into thinking that their reluctance to have intercourse with him is an illness. He uses this technique on nearly every woman he meets, and it almost always works. Otto boasts that he's had intercourse with more than 100 women. The next morning, Carl meets Sabina in a park, and they discuss intercourse. Sabina admits she has no sexual experience and suggests that this might contribute to her feelings of depression and anxiety. Consequently, she expresses a desire to gain such experience right away. When the doctor hesitates, Sabina takes the initiative and kisses him unexpectedly. She then invites Carl to her place later that evening for passionate intercourse. Later, during a therapy session, Otto encourages Karl to give in and engage in erotic acts with Sabina, arguing that if she wants it, he should provide it. However, Karl remains resolute in his decision. He doesn't want to betray his wife and acknowledges the taboo of becoming involved with a patient. Yet, as the persuasive Otto continues recounting some of his romantic escapades, Karl's resolve begins to weaken. He ultimately succumbs to his desires when the erratic Otto claps a worker in an open field. Unable to restrain himself any longer, Karl rushes to Sabina's place and becomes intimate with her. This marks the beginning of their affair, and over time, they engage in even more intense activities, including bondage and spanking. One day, Emma surprises Karl with a boat sporting red sails, knowing it's something he had always desired. She regards him as the best man in the world and mentions that he deserves everything he desires. Witnessing his wife's love and trust, Karl realizes he's betraying her. Consequently, he visits Sabina at her residence and confesses that they should end their affair immediately. However, she persuades him to continue their relationship, urging him to punish her, just as her father used to do. In the next scene, Dr. Freud returns from his business trip and meets with Karl to resume their discussions about their respective psychoanalysis theories. However, they frequently find themselves in disagreement, straining their friendship. As the conversation heats up, Freud brings up a rumor that Karl has taken one of his patients as a mistress and is engaging in sexual relations with her. Karl firmly denies the accusation, claiming he is merely closely monitoring the woman's progress. After the meeting ends, Karl realizes he can no longer conceal his affair, so he decides to end his secret relationship with Sabina, leaving her heartbroken and devastated. A few days later, Sabina bursts into Karl's office in a fit of rage and accuses him of informing her mother about their affair. She labels him a betrayer and an idiot. In response, Karl reveals that her mother was already aware of the relationship due to an anonymous letter she had received. He informs Sabina that he will now only treat her as his patient, disregarding their previous connection. This further infuriates Sabina, leading her to grab a knife and cut Karl's face before storming out. Later, she writes a letter to Dr. Freud, requesting a meeting to discuss her affair with Karl. After reading her letter, Freud writes to Karl to inquire about the truth of the matter, but Karl denies any involvement, stating that Sabina is spreading false rumors to destroy his life. Due to their close friendship, Freud readily believes Karl and sends a letter to Sabina, suggesting that they resolve their issues without his intervention. Overwhelmed by the circumstances, Sabina visits Karl's office once again, only to discover that he is leaving the hospital. He's heading to the United States to participate in a major conference. Enraged, Sabina scolds Karl for lying to Freud about their affair and demands that he write a letter to Freud confessing the truth about their relationship. Sabina also reminds Karl that she had the option to damage his reputation publicly but chose not to do so. After hearing all of this, Karl eventually complies and writes a letter to his friend in Austria, divulging the complete truth. When Freud reads the letter, he feels betrayed but not entirely surprised. He responds with a letter to Sabina, offering his apologies and expressing admiration for her approach to resolving the conflict. The scene then shifts to a few years later, when Sabina visits Karl's residence in Switzerland to collaborate on her dissertation. As they work together, memories of their passionate past resurface, where they engaged in intimate encounters in various locations such as Karl's bedroom, the mental ward, and even on the boat. So, they decide to create another memory by becoming intimate once more. Afterward, Sabina informs Karl of her decision to leave Zurich after completing her graduation and relocate to Vienna. This news makes Karl emotional, and he requests that she reconsider, but Sabina remains firm in her decision. 2 more years pass, and Sabina, now a qualified psychiatrist, is in Vienna, where she meets with Freud. During their discussion on psychoanalysis, Sabina expresses her support for Freud but also underscores the importance of coexistence between Freud and Karl for the continued development of psychoanalysis. However, Freud doesn't seem interested in reconciling with Karl, and their estrangement has reached a point where they don't even want to see each other. A year later, Sabina pays a visit to Emma at her home. Sabina is now married to a Russian doctor and is expecting a child, with a preference for a baby girl. As they converse, Emma reveals that Karl's mental state has deteriorated since his break with Freud. Consequently, she asks Sabina to talk to him. On the other hand, we see Karl quietly sitting by a serene river. It is revealed that he has distanced himself from his research work and is no longer productive. Shortly after, Sabina approaches him and initiates a conversation. Carl reveals that he has been haunted by apocalyptic dreams that prevent him from sleeping, often envisioning the entire city being engulfed by a cataclysmic flood capable of destroying the world. Sabina finds the topic uninteresting and swiftly changes it, mentioning her return to Russia with her husband. She also inquires about his new mistress, and Carl responds by introducing her as Tony, noting her resemblance to Sabina. He admits that Tony reminds him of the enjoyable times he shared with Sabina. Carl further acknowledges that his love for Sabina contributed to his personal growth but concedes that there's nothing he can do to alter the situation. After their conversation, Sabina departs the city in a carriage while Carl remains lost in his thoughts. In the film's concluding remarks, the destinies of the four analysts are revealed. Otto tragically succumbed to starvation in Berlin in 1920. Freud, after being forced out of Vienna by the Nazis, passed away from cancer in London in 1939. Sabina, having trained numerous analysts in the Soviet Union, met a tragic fate along with her two daughters as they were executed by the Nazis in 1942. Meanwhile, Carl overcame a nervous breakdown and achieved recognition as the world's premier psychologist before his death in 1961.